All right, welcome back, everyone. I know, once you, I was victim of it myself. Thank you, good panel. Hi there, Bhavya. I have to say that it's like you start connecting with good folks like yourselves, and you just don't want to stop. But we've got so many brilliant people here to share with us today. It is a privilege to be the president of Explore Mars. And so now as you guys kind of come back in, we've got another fantastic panel that's going to be led and moderated by our dear friend Bhavya Lal, Associate Administrator for Technology, Policy, and Strategy. As the Associate Administrator at NASA, she is responsible for providing evidence-driven advice to NASA leadership on internal and external policy issues, strategic planning, and technology investments. She also provides executive leadership and direction to the newly created Office of Technology, Policy, and Strategy within the Office of the Administrator. So I can't wait to hear what you guys have in store. Thank you so much. Give them a big round of applause.
Thank you, everyone. I am so excited to be here with Anthony Calomino and Tabitha Dodson. These are two of the giants in the field of space, nuclear power, and propulsion. And I have a really good list of questions, but I want you all to ask questions as well. I want to start with a little quick anecdote. So in 1933, Ernest Rutherford, who is widely considered the father of nuclear physics, said, and I'm going to read here, "The bombardment of the atom is a very poor and inefficient way of producing energy, and anyone who is looking for a source of cheap power in the transformation of the atom is talking pure moonshine." We are not expecting anything of the kind. Someday the knowledge we may gain may be of practical value, but there is no indication of yet. So luckily, there is indication of it yet. For the last 70 years, we've had nuclear power terrestrially, and of course, it is so exciting now to see the same, us taking nuclear power into space. So we are doing a lot in the government, and we have the two top people to tell us about all of that. Dr. Anthony Calomino is the Space Nuclear Propulsion Technologies lead at NASA, and Dr. Tabitha Dodson is the program manager for the DRACO program at DARPA, and she will tell us all about it. So let's get right to it. I'm going to start with Anthony. So Anthony, tell us, what is NASA currently doing in the field of space, nuclear power, and propulsion? What are you excited about? What are you nervous about?
So I think I had a slide. Did you want to pull the slide up?
Yes, the slide is up there.
Okay, great. So I put together the slide to just kind of like have something to go along with visually as I talk about what NASA's looking at and what we're working on. First, NASA has been investing in nuclear technology, both power and propulsion, for quite a few years. It's if you even wanted to go back further than that, you could go back a few decades to even the 60s and 70s. But we've had sort of intermittent stop-start investment cycles on nuclear power and propulsion over those decades. More recently, over the last 7 years or so, we've begun to invest in this technology again. And we're really looking at it in terms of what it means when we look at a lunar economy and the growth of a lunar economy. And we're also looking at it in anticipation of what is it going to take to actually have a human exploration mission to Mars. We've had significant investment so far in what we call nuclear thermal propulsion. Nuclear thermal propulsion is a relatively simple concept from an engineering perspective. It is one where we actually have a reactor, which I would offer to visualize as a heat exchanger. It is an extremely high temperature heat exchanger operating at about 3,000 degrees Kelvin. And that heat exchanger is used to add thermal energy to a propellant mass flow through it, which is typically hydrogen, and then that is exhausted out the back to produce thrust. So it's really a very simple system. The big challenge with nuclear thermal is the fact that we've got to have a reactor that can operate at those temperatures. NASA has been making investments in that technology, and over the last 2 or 3 years, I think well, I know that we have made some advances in that technology to the point where we have systems, fuels, reactor materials, reactor designs that are actually quite feasible. And so in the last year, my colleague Tabitha Dodson, NASA and DARPA joined forces on a DRACO flight demonstrator program. And on that partnership, NASA would take management and funding responsibility for what we're calling a nuclear thermal rocket engine. And DARPA's would take responsibility or management and funding responsibility for the overall mission itself for the integrated vehicle that would be demonstrated. We still need CFM, other aspects of that vehicle in there. And they would take responsibility for the CONOPS and a lot of the nuclear regulatory requirements as well. NASA's interest in this is, Mars is a long distance out. It's not just a long distance away, but in terms of time. Looking at mission scenarios, looking at mission opportunities, it's a little further out than what we're looking at as a time horizon on the cislunar activity. Cislunar actually offers us an opportunity to develop a capability, an operational capability, where you could actually have a transportation system from Earth to the moon, as well as an ascent and descent capability from the surface. So in that sense, we could look to develop an operational capability that's a cislunar operational capability and then expand that into a Mars transportation capability over time, gaining experience, knowledge, engineering design, getting a better feel for the reliability of that system before we would deploy it. One of the other activities that we're investing in that is nuclear and also directly relates to the Artemis activity as well as the lunar Earth kind of an economy is fission surface power. So, when you're looking at what does it take for humans to explore or look at opportunities outside of a capability where they have a lot of the infrastructure that they already need. Well, and I've said this before, well, you need a communications infrastructure. You need the ability to communicate. One of the other things you need a transportation capability. Well, we're looking at the transportation capability on that right now, looking at nuclear propulsion. And then you need a power infrastructure. You need to be able to supply power. We're looking at lunar operations that will be in situ resource utilization, producing fuel, producing other chemicals and compounds that would be needed to sustain life on the lunar surface. And in that case, we're looking at tens of kilowatts up to eventually maybe, depending on how things expand, megawatts worth of power. That's going to be a capability that needs to be driven by fission. One of our first forays into that is to actually develop a capability in the 40 kilowatt range. And there are some of the requirements that we have on that, and we've engaged industry in this to actually help us with looking at the development of this capability. It's also in a power range that we think we can scale up or down depending on whether or not the target is Mars and looking at what we would need for power on Mars or on the lunar surface. And then finally, we've had some acute interest in nuclear electric propulsion for many years. Budgets have been tight. Often these resources get spread out a little on some of the other higher priority activities that my mission directorate, Space Technology, has, and we haven't really had the opportunity to invest in nuclear electric propulsion. And this year, actually, we had a modest amount to get started on that technology. We're also looking there to develop it at a subscale, not necessarily human scale for Mars, but actually developing it for a subscale capability, something that actually is meaningful for a cislunar operation, some science, lunar orbiting capabilities, and then maybe even a deep space science exploration mission, and then gain that experience, get that knowledge on that integrated system, and evolve that into an informed sort of design and an informed investment strategy for a larger scale human transportation system for Mars. So that's really where our investment strategies are right now. We have made some changes over the last few years from NASA's perspective that have, I think, energized this. They certainly have expanded our opportunity to work with universities and work with industry. We did that by focusing in on low enriched uranium fuels. These are fuels that that are used in terrestrial systems. And so we opened up that market to the terrestrial power industry to participate with us. That has proven to be very productive for us. And this new pivot to looking at what can we do in a cislunar space that can offer us that evolvable technology platform to get to a capability that can then be used to get to Mars is also offering a lot of opportunities to us right now.
So I have some follow-ups on that, but let me first go to Tab and ask her to tell us about what DARPA is doing. Tell us about the DRACO program. What are you excited about? What are you nervous about?
Sure, and I don't have any slides, but you can sort of see tiny DRACO on Anthony's slide there.
With the logos are there too.
Yes, and also the logos. So DRACO is an acronym, stands for Demonstration Rocket for Agile Cislunar Operations. And then the three logos there are DARPA's, NASA's, and the Space Force. So as Anthony had mentioned, DARPA and NASA are roughly 50-50 partners on the DRACO program, and the Space Force had signaled an intent to pump for a launch vehicle, so currently they're going through the processes there to get the launch vehicle, which as you can imagine is not a cheap investment, but once they come on board with that, they'll be our third major partner on this program. So the DRACO program is meant to build a nuclear thermal rocket and get it into space for an in-space flight demonstration in the roughly fiscal year 2027 timeframe. And so why is DARPA doing this? So DARPA likes to do programs that introduce leap-ahead technologies in their respective domains. So in our case, this is a leap-ahead propulsion technology in the space domain. And I would argue that all nuclear reactors in space are leap-ahead technologies in their respective domains. So for power, as you can see here, what NASA is doing, nuclear reactors afford you a leap-ahead power capability in the space domain as well. So my hope is that for the DRACO program, it will set a good example, or at least bring a lot of visibility to the benefits that nuclear reactors can provide to the space domain. So similar to what we can use nuclear reactors for in the ocean, just like in space, the ocean is a vast and primarily inhospitable place for humans to live. I mean, there's lots of things you can do if you're sort of abandoned out in the ocean to survive. But if you have vast amounts of power at your disposal, it makes survival a lot easier. So just like when you're in space for long amounts of time, if you have power at your disposal, it helps you to survive that much easier. And also, you want to get across the void quickly. You don't want to loiter in the middle of the ocean. You want to go from one continent to the other as quickly as possible, just like you'd want to go from the Earth to Mars as quickly as possible. So you want to have the best engine that you can. And in our case, just like again in the sea, nuclear propulsion is looking like the best option for that. So again, going back to what DARPA is doing, so we're just focusing on nuclear thermal rockets. And this, again, you might ask yourself, well, why are we selecting this particular engine as the demonstration for this program versus a variety of other type of technologies we might be doing? So another thing that DARPA likes to do is to both prevent surprise from being imparted upon the United States and to also create technological surprise from the United States. So create our own Sputnik moments, if you will. In fact, DARPA was created in response to the Sputnik event so as to prevent something like that from happening to the United States again. So going back to the NERVA rover program that ran from roughly the 50s to the 70s, we feel that this technology is ready for a flight demonstration such that we can do a Sputnik moment with this nuclear thermal rocket. Nobody has flown one in space before. And again, back in NERVA rover, NERVA is another acronym, the Nuclear Engine for Rocket Vehicle Applications. They brought that engine to roughly TRL-4 through a couple of dozen different reactor and engine experiments. And so if you refer back to history, you know the Nixon administration came on board and decided to shift to more nearer Earth space missions, space station, and things of that sort, space shuttle. And so we cut off our focus to going beyond Apollo to the moon during that particular administration. So now we have an opportunity to look ahead to engines that can take us again beyond the moon. And luckily, we have enough interest in the national space to fund something like this program. So something, going back to your question, that I'm most excited about for the DARPA DRACO and program with NASA is the fact that we are picking back, we're picking back where we left off and doing that flight demo with the nuclear thermal rocket. But just like with NERVA rover, which was a series of engine tests, so in every engine test they changed something, they did something new, we're doing something new with DRACO. And the biggest thing that's new is we're using high-assay, low-enriched uranium. So that makes for an entirely different kind of neutronics problem. And so we're going to learn a lot of different physics that we didn't learn during NERVA rover. And it will be something that NASA will be able to take the lessons learned as they continue on their engine development program. Because just like with NERVA rover, you would never want to take one of those big Kiwi engines from the early part of NERVA. Kiwi literally means flightless bird. And envision that as your ultimate engine that you would use in a demo. But you do take every engine from NERVA and you learn something like you learn the structural restraints that's what they learned in Kiwi, and the startup techniques that you learn in the middle part of the program, moderation techniques that they learned for things like the Pee-wee engine. And in this case, NASA will learn what does HALEU do to the engine, and then after that, they can make a perfect engine. That way, at the end of maybe their 30th demonstration, they'll have that perfect engine, that perfect little, very high specific impulse, perfect thrust engine that will take them to Mars if that's what they choose to do. So that's what I'm most excited about, getting that information.
Thank you. So as a nuclear engineer, you know that I'm excited because I'm wearing my atom earrings, and if you can look at it, it's the lithium atom, and I have no idea why they make it a lithium atom and not uranium-235. I guess that's a lot of laser machining. Anyway, it's just very exciting to see what DARPA is going to accomplish together with NASA. I want to get back to Anthony. Anthony, you had said at a higher level the next steps after what DARPA does in this demo. Can you be a little bit more specific? Can you just take that same engine that DARPA used and put it on a Mars spacecraft? Or what are the things that need to change for it to actually be relevant for a mission to Mars or a transit to Mars?
So Tab mentioned 30 versions of the engine, maybe before we get it perfect. I'd like to think maybe we could do 3 before we get it to perfect. But we'll see. The DRACO demonstrator is really a prototype. It is going to be constructed fast. As Tab indicated, we're looking at a launch in 2027. We're coming into the fiscal year 2024. So this is going to be a very rapid pace program to do the demonstration. The engine will have a lot of the materials and fuels technology, even the reactor design technology, that we believe are going to be the more promising approaches to having an operational system. But the overall engine itself, although it will operate in space and it will have some of the performance capabilities that we are interested in using for Mars, the design itself is as Tab said, it's the first of a kind that we're going to do. We expect it to literally be a prototype. To move, and there are going to be surprises, right? I mean, in most engineering problems, particularly in technology development, you approach it with your known knowns and you engineer around your known knowns. You have, if you're lucky, you have your known unknowns that that you mitigate through risk strategies and some safety margins and some basic fundamental engineering approaches to minimize the impact of what you don't know about the operation of the engine. Of course, then I think with these new technologies, even in this case, you're going to hit your unknowns. You're going to have things that are going to show up and they're going to be surprises. That's the whole point in doing a demonstration. It's the whole point in running the experiment, is to really shake those out of the system and understand what they are. It would be great if at the end we're not surprised, but I don't think anyone walking into this doesn't feel that there are going to be some surprises in terms of engineering the system and probably even operating the system. That'll give us an opportunity, though, once we gather that information from the demonstrator, and we'll be able to use that information then to evolve the design and to find new solutions to areas where we didn't get the optimized performance, or maybe there were areas where there were challenges in terms of getting some startups or shutdowns on the reactor, and improve it for the second design iteration. And that's kind of the first few steps that we'll look at in getting it to an operational system. I want to be very careful, though, to indicate, and I think it's really important looking even at this first demonstrator, is that from NASA's perspective, right, reliability and safety are going to be paramount in any system that we have where we expect or envision that we're going to be using to transport humans. And so to gain that reliability and to gain that margin of safety and understand that system, there's going to be a longer campaign of Earth-based tests that we'll need to do. We'll actually be able to learn, I think, from the DARPA demonstrator. We'll have a better understanding of what we really need to do with some of these Earth-based tests to get that engineering standard. Obviously, we're not going to be able to forensically examine the engine when we're done testing it after the DRACO flight demonstrator, but we're going to want to have that opportunity.
Say more on that. I don't think that's clear to everyone. Why won't we be able to forensically
I would like to have Tab explain why it is that we're not going to retrieve I think that's what it is. We won't have it available to look at in an engineering, take it apart and see how the pieces parts operated since.
Well, yeah, the engine, once it's been operated in space, it will be, quite far away from the Earth, and we're definitely, unless somebody really wants to go up there and put their hands on it, it's going to be far away from the public for probably at least 1,000 years. So it'll be disposed of in a circular orbit around the Earth without any intent to come back.
And the reason for that?
So I guess we're talking me now.
Yeah, I figured, turn it over. I think that's more of the DARPA's kind of responsibility, and a lot of this is to decide how that is all managed and how the safety aspects are going to be worked.
So maybe just address the safety issues. That was something I was meaning to ask you.
Okay, yeah, sure. So we, in orbit disposal, there are a few different standards, and we're trying to follow all of them at the same time. Some of them are a little bit more challenging than others to meet, and of course will depend on what launch vehicle that we get. So for instance, we will follow at least Space Policy Directive 6, which says to have your fission platform in an orbit in which the lifetime of the orbital decay is longer than the lifetime it takes for your fission products to decay to some reasonable level where people can actually go and clean up the platform after it re-enters. So in our case, the fission products will live to a maximum amount of time of about 300 years, and that's a very conservative bounding number. And so that puts us at an orbit of about 750 kilometers circular. So if you have a platform at that orbit, it'll take about 300 years due to natural orbital decay for that thing to circle its way back to Earth and re-enter the atmosphere. There is a more stringent requirement, orbital debris mitigation standard practices, which says to put your fission system at 2,000 kilometers. And so the reason for that is because this is a relatively uninhabited orbit around the Earth. such that if you had some part of the spacecraft fail, then you wouldn't have to worry about generating debris that would interact with any constellations, major constellations at that altitude. So we'll be somewhere between 750 to 2,000 kilometers altitude, depending on how it works out. It's primarily going to be something that the Space Force weighs in on as well. So that's with respect to on-orbit disposal, and that's not our number one, what I would call safety guiding principle. The number one principle for this program is that we'll never turn the reactor on while it's on the Earth or when it's in the rocket, while it's being carried into space. So a nuclear reactor that's never been turned on is like it's like a solid block of any other heavy metal. It's something you can walk right up to. You can put your hands on it. You could probably walk by a block of uranium, or at least a block of our core, and you wouldn't even notice. You wouldn't take a second glance at it because it would look like just like any other metal to you. So in this way, when we have to give the safety individuals our reports of what do we think would happen in a launch accident, what would an accident look like, we can tell them with confidence that if this platform, if the stage, I refer to it as a stage, is dropped, if the launch vehicle fails and it drops our stage, then people can walk right up to it. The cleanup is very easy, and you don't have to worry about impacts to the environment or impacts to the biosphere. So with the reactor completely off at all stages, not only leading up to launch or in the event of a launch accident, we make this reactor very safe to the public. So we go the extra step on top of making sure the reactor is off the entire time leading up to the demo. We prevent the reactor from turning itself on, and that might seem kind of crazy. And the probabilities of the reactor turning itself on are actually next to impossible. It would have to, some sort of disaster would have to reconfigure the reactor and turn all the drums exactly at the same time to make a perfectly symmetrical reaction to bring this into criticality, and it would have to flush out all the materials we have in the core to prevent a fission reaction from occurring. So what we're doing is putting all kinds of inhibitors on this core. So for instance, one way is to break the geometry of the system. You can put something on the side of the core that shoots into the core, and if you disrupt the symmetrical geometry of a fission reactor, then you prevent the fission from occurring that you'd be worried about causing harm to the biosphere. And as I mentioned before, there are materials that you can fill the core with. In the nuclear world, we call them neutron poisons. What that is, it's just an inhibitor that prevents...
It sounds like a good heavy metal band, neutron.
Yeah, yeah, that too. They absorb the neutrons and prevent them from reaching the uranium. So we're doing lots of things that we can to prevent this reactor from turning itself on. And we're making it super safe. And then one of our first objectives once we get it into space is obviously we want to turn it on. So we're going to spend a lot of time taking all of the seat belts off of this thing and trying to turn it on. But yes, it's going to be super safe to the point of being, I'm not going to say too safe, but just so safe.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're learning lessons from the past. When I was an undergraduate studying nuclear engineering, we used to use the phrase, electricity is going to be too cheap to meter. Turns out that didn't happen for a variety of reasons, so I'm glad that you're not making overly optimistic predictions. So I want to take a quick break and see if there's any questions from the audience. And while you're thinking about it, well, actually, we have a question, or maybe Jim is leaving. I don't know. He's leaving. So I have pages full of questions.
We do have a question
Oh,
from
hi.
the gentleman.
Hello.
Hi, this is Hoppy Price at JPL, and I have a question related to, do you see the DRACO engine for both robotic and for human missions? And what do you think the challenges are of human rating the DRACO engine for like multi-year operations with crew?
Maybe Tab, you can take it, and then Anthony can focus on the human rating piece.
Yeah, that just sounds like a great NASA question. So DARPA will our focus is on the demo itself. And then after that, the agencies that are forward-thinking that do missions like this to Mars and elsewhere can think about how to evolve the DRACO engine. But I would say in the evolutionary path between like the first NERVA engine to where NASA wants to go, DRACO is, it's like a branch that could branch in either direction. It just depends on what you end up learning from the DRACO demo.
Perhaps you could comment on, I think part of the question was reusability or multi-use of the reactor and the engine. That seems to me to be somewhat of interest to some of your purposes for looking at it.
So after the demo itself is over?
No, just in terms of potentially an operational system that would be of interest to DoD. We've looked at it for some of the human scale engines right now, and there's the difference between maybe what we're looking at for thrust levels and power levels for a cislunar operational system and what we'd be looking for a human Mars capability is probably on the order of like 4 times. It's probably a number that's reasonably close. It could be a little bit bigger, a little bit less, depending on what the configuration of the vehicle is. We've looked at really that first operation of the NTP vehicle to go to and then back from Mars. I've forgotten exactly the burn-up rate on that fuel, but it's very, very low. We really don't burn much of the fuel on that first mission. I've heard that typically before you even would run into some of the problems with some of the nuclides that would generate that would actually become neutron poisoners for the reaction, that you could actually end up using the engine up to 3 or 4 times for return full round trip between Mars and Earth. For a cislunar operation, I think we're looking at lower ISP, lower thrust, which means lower temperature, lower burn-up rates out of that engine. We haven't done the calculations on that to actually find out, how many reusable trips or how the use would go, but it would certainly be greater than what we would see from Mars for that.
Yeah, I think part of Hoppy's question was human rating.
So, human rating of the system, honestly, it's going to be a challenge for both power and for NTP, the human rating aspects, because it really comes down to reliability. And you only gain reliability. You can use models, well-founded, well-validated models you can use, but there's no replacing the experimental data. And I was talking previously about the fact that the DRACO mission in and of itself is not sufficient, right? So we really are going to have a ground campaign of testing to gain that level of confidence and reliability. The nice thing about the cislunar activity is that it gives us a near-Earth ability to use that vehicle, even for payloads or other non-human missions, and gain that experience and gain that understanding of what that system is before we go to Mars or before we would use it for any other capability. The other thing is like, one of the things that NASA does on most of its systems to gain reliability is multiple systems, right? So that if you have one system fail, you have a critical number that can still complete the mission. And in this case, we would look at, most of them that I've seen are 3 engines. You can still complete the mission on 2. You could go to lower thrust and more engines, and then you increase your reliability. So all of that will be worked inside that trade space.
Another question?
Hi, thank you. You've touched on it a couple different times, but I was wondering if you could expand on the regulatory, legislative, and public relations challenges that you're currently facing in regards to nuclear propulsion, as well as kind of the paths forward for both DARPA and NASA.
So I don't think we have any what you would call challenges from a regulatory or legal perspective. So in the Department of Defense, I like to joke that we eat uranium like cereal or like Cheerios, because when it comes to who gets to use the uranium in this country, it's Department of Energy, Department of Defense. We use them for, the Navy uses them in naval reactors, and obviously we have weapons that we put uranium and other things. So it's pretty straightforward when it comes to getting the permission, I guess you'd call it, to do the program or to justify having the reactor. We are still working with the Department of Energy for the uranium, given that they have a supply of high-assay, low-enriched uranium that we have another agreement with them in order to use it for the DRACO program. And then we also have an authorization from the Department of Energy. And again, this is very similar to what Naval Reactors has for the Department of Defense to have for the reactor in DRACO. And so as an agency, being a Department of Defense entity, when we go to Cape Canaveral, which is also a DoD sort of territory, we can leverage those pre-existing Air Force regulations that are there at the Cape. And they have written into their regs standards for radiological risk to the public in the event of an accident and the probability of an accident when it comes to nuclear reactors. So luckily for us, those tables that the DoD follows for nuclear regulations in the event of an accident are the same almost across the board when you look at other regulations. So for instance, the National Security Presidential Memorandum, NISPM 20, which is a policy which says how you go about getting launch approval for a nuclear system. It has the same table. So the same table for, make sure your probability of an accident is this tiny and your radiological release to the public is also this tiny. So we've done a lot of preliminary calculations to show, in the event of an accident, how well do we meet these regulatory standards, and we pass all the standards with flying colors. And it goes back to the fact that we're never turning the reactor on while we're on the Earth. And if we do that, then we can very quickly just sort of point to the regs and say, we meet these standards. So that's, I think, the high-level answer.
Yeah, I think the core issue which you pointed to is the public relations challenge. And again, as a nuclear engineer, I can say that it doesn't matter if we are following all the rules and the regulations and staying on the thresholds. The PR challenge, that's a narrative that we need to fight with a counter narrative. And I think we haven't paid as much attention to it as a community as we need to. We do know, for example, when the Cassini was launched with, I think, 20, 35, some large kilograms of plutonium-238 on board, there was a lot of public protest, and it was handled. But I think we need to learn from the past, and little things like the 3 Mile Island or the Fukushima accidents, there were 0 fatalities. However, they essentially moribunded the global nuclear enterprise, right? So I think we need to learn lessons from the terrestrial nuclear enterprise to see what it is that we need to translate for our work in space nuclear. Otherwise, all of this effort and the funding and the good work that these guys are doing is to naught. And again, I think that we have time. We have time. We are thinking of the first Mars trip in the mid to late 2030s. So, but we need to get going. And again, I also wanted to underscore NSPM 20, National Security Presidential Memorandum 20, which actually lays out how we can safely launch a nuclear reactor. So there's a lot of work that has gone into the fundamentals, but we need to work on the public relations part.
And I just wanted to add quickly, and really it's more of an emphasis than adding anything in terms of content to it, and it goes back to some of the things that Tabitha said. And that is, I want to reinforce that the fission systems are at launch, is you move that capability away from Earth and into space are far safer in terms of the launch and the risk of radiological exposure or any of the other things. This is a chunk of metal sitting inside of a payload that really hasn't seen any active radiation, any fission that's happened. And so it's a very, very safe thing. And the one thing that Tab did point to, and I agree with, is like we've taken a very belt and suspenders approach to make certain that we don't even have an inadvertent criticality of that reactor until we place it into its serviceable location, whether it's on the moon, on the surface of Mars, or 1,000 kilometers away from Earth.
I think maybe one more thing to point out is, as far as I know, the most recent, like Mars 2020, or other rovers that used RTGs didn't have the same level of protest, or I don't think they had any protest. So maybe that, I think that for us at least drives some optimism that the public is a lot more accepting of these sorts of technologies. And going back to the at launch, it wasn't called out explicitly, but we're near the background when it comes to radiation levels, background radiation. But when we launch RTGs, there's something like 60,000 curies of radioactivity. And so that kind of provides you with some level of comparison. So we launch, or NASA launches RTGs for many missions, Mars missions, like, such as what I just mentioned, without any issue, and they do so very, very safely. So as far as this goes, this is tens of thousands of times less radio toxic, and from a public relations perspective, shouldn't be as quote unquote interesting, I guess.
Right, but I think as scientists, we like to tote facts and we assume that they will be accepted. I think we need to work on the narrative as well. Question?
Hi, Bruce Jakosky, University of Colorado. Question for Tabitha. You've emphasized a couple of times that you don't turn the reactor on until it's in space. Maybe a naive question, but how do you test it if you don't turn it on?
So this is one thing I like to, there's two things I like to emphasize to people. One, this isn't the first nuclear thermal rocket reactor that we've ever built. This is in a long line of predecessors that have demonstrated much higher power densities than this reactor has. So the concept of a nuclear thermal rocket reactor and how you can operate it with the drums and the regenerative cooling loops and all that has been shown feasible and proven to work. The next thing is the fact that when we get up into orbit, we're not going to just turn the key and go full throttle at the get-go. So just like any other experiment that we do for critical assemblies, we're going to do very incremental, stepwise approaches to criticality. So that might not sound like it makes a lot of sense, but instead of going from, say, 0 to hundreds of megawatts thermal in the span of 60 seconds, we'll go to maybe 0 to a few watts in a matter of hours, and then 0 to hundreds of watts in a matter of days. And then we'll go back and forth until we learn enough about the reactor such that we gain enough confidence that we can bring this reactor to full power. And again, taking all those lessons learned that we have from the past on what it means to do a true rocket engine startup, because that's the thing that you're asking about, like how do we have confidence that we can use this thing like a rocket engine? And again, that's something that we've seen in the past, like indeed a reactor of this size, of this packing of uranium, and with this amount of reactivity can be used in a rocket engine. That's something that we've seen already happen before. Now we need to use our knowledge when it comes to nuclear engineering. We know how much uranium it takes to make a critical mass and how much uranium it takes to make fission happen. That's pretty well known. We don't need to rewrite a nuclear physics textbook to reconfirm those equations. So we'll verify that for our configuration of materials that all the coefficients that we predicted prior to the experiment are within some percentage of accuracy. And then we'll step back up to using this reactor as a rocket engine after we validated those basic predictions.
So it sounds like you're going to rely on heritage and prior experience and not test for any workmanship issues before you launch?
So
No, there's a lot of tests we're going to do on the ground, engine-related testing. So
I wanted to say, the Department of Energy has been extremely active in developing high-fidelity models for nuclear reactions. That's been a heavy investment by them since the above-ground testing, actually any testing of nuclear reactions, on Earth was stopped. And so, but that didn't stop them from taking everything they knew and develop these extremely robust models that they use now. And actually, they have uncertainty quantifications with them. They have other modeling capabilities that NASA's reached out to try and pull into some of our models. Those models are being used to look at the design of the reactor. Those models are being used to apply to what does it take? Do we have reasonable confidence that we're going to achieve criticality on that reactor? It does give us a lot of confidence, but there's some other tests, not necessarily, and we have them maybe as a part of what DRACO can be, and that is something we call a zero power critical test, which we could run. A zero power critical test actually doesn't allow the reactor to produce any power or radionuclides, but what it would do is it would give us an opportunity to understand the neutron fluence and how that neutron fluence looks like inside the reactor. And that's really a big critical part of whether or not that reactor is going to perform. So I'm not going, and I don't mean to add to something I think Tab covered it much. I mean, there are going to be some lean forward risks that we recognize that are there. But we're going to, and we have a strategy in place right now to manage them the best we can with the engineering knowledge that we have to execute this program.
I want to ask one last question before we run out of time, and it's a little controversial, so bear with me. There's some who assert, and there's some of those even within NASA, that say that we can get to Mars with chemical propulsion, we don't need nuclear. How do you respond to that assertion? What do you see as pros and cons of a chemical round trip to Mars? And again, the question's for both of you, but maybe Anthony, you can start.
So I think the obvious answer is yes, we can get to Mars with chemical propulsion. That's, it's something we can do. From my perspective, and I guess maybe I should add a little bit to that, it all depends on what the architecture is that you want in place to achieve that mission. What is the purpose of the mission? To use chemical propulsion for some of the mission opportunities, shorter duration mission opportunities, you're looking at the need to either stage fuel around Mars to make the return trip home, or you need to have a rather large infrastructure that's placed onto the surface of Mars to produce fuel to come home. And so that is a possibility, but you begin to look at what is required in terms of the number of launches, in terms of the overall logistics of doing something like that, and the infrastructure, what you're going to do there. And you need to make a decision then, because you've already decided the how, right? I'm going to go to Mars with chemical. You now need to make the decision of why, right? So it's like, why are you going to use chemical to get to Mars? From my perspective, I think, and this is very personal just to me, it's like I think a bigger part of NASA's mission that goes beyond say going to Mars or Titan or the lunar surface. It's the challenge in the often the technology you need to achieve it, right? So it's sometimes I can talk about it in terms of the journey, not necessarily the destination, and the products that you're able to develop to actually complete that mission, a very challenging mission. Nuclear propulsion, nuclear capabilities will change the paradigm of how we explore our solar system and how we can operate within our solar system. And it will do so in a way that chemical systems can't possibly do. So if we're looking at developing a new capability, a capability that can actually impact us here on Earth in terms of green energy, in terms of sustainable systems on Earth, then this is an investment system, I think, that makes a lot of sense for us to move forward with.
I couldn't agree more. Tab, any final words from you?
No, I guess I just, from a DoD perspective, and again, looking between the Earth and the Moon, if there is an increase in economy, there could be the potential that a nuclear thermal propulsion could afford the Space Force with the means to protect, say, the shipping lanes, just like the Navy does, from one country or another, and the lines of communication and things of that nature. And so I'm actually, rooting for NASA to build up the infrastructure on the Moon, such that it kind of gives the Space Force an excuse to expand as well, and be part of that whole outward exploring community. And I believe that nuclear, again, is the answer, not only for propulsion, but also power. And hopefully what we do from here to the Moon will help set the stage for, again, we're here for the Mars Summit, so for what is needed to go to Mars as well. So.
That's wonderful to hear. So that's all, folks. What a great panel. Thank you so much, Anthony and Tab. And back to you, Jana.
Thank you, Dr. Lal, and your fantastic guests.